Thank you, Alaskan Corla. Can I say at the outset that I wish, with the agreement of the House, to share my time with Minister of State Fergus O'Dowd. I'll be speaking for 20 minutes. Alaskan Corla, you might mark my cards when I'm up to the line on it. And at the very outset, can I congratulate Deputy Brendan Smith on his appointment as the spokesperson for education with the Fianna Fáil party, and I hope to have a constructive and positive relationship with you, as we've had in the past. And may I also, in relation to the comments made by Deputy Dara Calleary, say that let me use this opportunity to clarify the record in relation to the value for money exercise in rural schools. There are 620 rural schools in the country that have less than 50 pupils. And last October, the previous Minister, Taoiseach Mary Coughlin, commissioned a value for money exercise in line with normal government practice, and submissions for that VFM the deadline for them was quite recently, and that's what brought the publicity and the attention to them. I, as Minister for Education Skills, and the Government, of which I'm proud to be a member, have absolutely no viewpoint or no position or no prejudiced outlook in relation to rural schools. We will simply await the outcome of the value for money exercise, and we will approach the conclusions of that exercise without prejudice. And I know that it has been presented and suggested in some quarters that there is some kind of bias. There is none. It's simply what it is, a value for money exercise initiated by the previous administration. This government, I want to confirm, will not be opposing this motion. We will not be calling for a vote tomorrow, and we will not be voting against it. In fact, I doubt that there is anyone in this chamber who would disagree that education and training would play a central role in the economic recovery and job creation in the years ahead, and that education and training should therefore be protected as a priority area for funding in future budgets. The resources that have been put into education in this country over the past number of decades are proof of the importance attached to having a well-educated workforce, which has provided this small country with a very valuable competitive advantage and has played a key role in our economic development. The big problem here, however, is that while there is indeed much more that needs to be done to give us the first-class education system that this country, and especially our young people, deserve, Ireland has, in blunt terms, been placed into receivership by the previous Fianna Fáil-led administration. Thanks to economic mismanagement on a grand scale, which has saddled every family and every child in Ireland with a significant long-term debt, we are now in the position where much of the money we spend on our public servants and on our public services comes not from our taxes, but from ECB monies provided to our banking system. This situation of indebtedness is, of course, unsustainable, which is why this new national government has come together with one overriding objective: to regain our economic sovereignty and once again give us control over our economic destiny. A control where the power to make and take decisions rests with ourselves as citizens of this republic. To regain control of our sovereignty, however, will not be easy. It will take hard work on all of our parts and will require this government to carry through some difficult decisions that will impact on all of us. Some of these savings decisions have already been incorporated as specific budgetary targets that underpin the agreed EU-IMF programme, compliance with which is currently being monitored by a team of EU and IMF experts who recently arrived in this country. The government has effectively had no choice but to sign up to the decisions in the agreement that must be met in 2011 and 2012. These decisions include a number of savings measures across the education sector decided by the previous government. Some other savings decisions, covering the period 2012-2014, have yet to be formulated in order for the overall EU-IMF expenditure reduction targets to be reached. Identifying and securing further savings in the education sector will be a challenge. So, while, as I say, I am happy to support this motion, I feel it is important that we acknowledge the gravity of the economic situation that we have inherited and the constraints it places upon us. Our hands are, to a great extent, tied by the rope of indebtedness that the previous government has woven for us. In spite of the challenging position in which we find ourselves, I believe that the new programme for government will provide the basis to restore confidence and to get our economy moving again. In relation to education, this government's ambition in the new programme, which was ratified by the Dáil, is to build a knowledge society for education to be at the heart of a more cohesive and more equal society, and to be the engine of sustainable economic growth. We need to shift the debate from one about inputs to one about outcomes. There are a range of proposals in the programme for government that seek to ensure maximum quality outcomes at all levels of the education system. The programme for government also contains proposals to resource the Jobs Fund, which will provide additional places in training, work experience and educational opportunities for those who are out of work, and to provide a range of initiatives to increase access to further higher level education for the unemployed. Further details regarding the Jobs Fund will be announced shortly by government. Before I refer to some of the specific education and training aims for the new programme for government, it is important to state that achieving these aims will require us to spend astutely and efficiently, and to target our resources in a more effective manner so that we can achieve the best educational outcomes. While the 2011 expenditure allocation for my department at £8.91 billion is one of the largest across government, much of this is in fact 77% of current expenditure goes on pay and pensions, 30% or 103,000 of those unemployed in the public sector at the end of last year were employed in the education sector. Over 71,000 of these are either teachers or special needs assistants. Securing further savings in the education sector while endeavouring to protect frontline education and training services consequently presents a very significant challenge. The comprehensive spending reviews, agreed in principle by government yesterday, will constitute an important mechanism to assist us in preparing the budget for 2012 and for future years. All departments, including my own, will immediately set about preparing comprehensive expenditure reports by the end of June to identify arising from efficiencies and other reforms, proposals for rationalisation of agencies and the scope for further reductions in staffing. The reviews will be assessed by a steering committee and finalised for presentation to the Government Economic Management Council in September, feeding into the budget process. And I should, for the benefit of the House, confirm that the Economic Management Council is comprised of the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, and the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Public Expenditure and Public Service Reform. It is intended that the reviews will provide the Government with a comprehensive set of decisions which will, among other things, help to do the following. 1. To meet the overall fiscal consolidation objectives as set out in the EU-IMF agreement. 2. To facilitate the further reductions in public service numbers set out in the programme for government, and which are essential if the public sector pay bill is to be managed. 3. To realign spending with priorities in the new programme for government. And finally, to identify new ways of achieving government objectives in a more efficient way, in effect, doing more with less. When the review process is completed, we should have a clearer picture of the environment in which budgetary decisions for 2012 are to be taken. The review process will also include an initiative to allow all stakeholders, including public servants, the social partners, state bodies and the general public, to provide a direct input to the review exercise. I think this is an important and welcome feature of the process. During the recent general election campaign, the Labour Party promised to prioritise a comprehensive spending review, and the new government has quickly implemented this agreed policy proposal. While this spending review will involve difficult decisions, it will also afford the opportunity to reform the public service, to enhance efficiency and eliminate waste. Rather than adopting a piecemeal cheese-paring approach which results in crude and damaging cuts that damage further growth and public services, as Fianna Fáil did when in office, the new government will insist on a properly planned multi-annual expenditure strategy. This evening's motion notes the increases that have taken place in numbers of teachers in schools and improvement in the pupil-teacher ratios. As Minister for Finance during the previous Rainbow government, I and many of my colleagues here on the government benches worked incredibly hard to ensure that Ireland was one of the most competitive economies in the European Union. The economic track record of that government is worth repeating for the benefit of the House. We had the first planned government surplus in more than 3 decades. Inflation was kept low and the national debt fell to 63% of GDP. When we left office in 1997, 1,000 new jobs were being created every week in the Irish economy. This prudent management of the economy laid a solid foundation for the improvements in the resources to schools that occurred subsequently. Teacher numbers have increased significantly since, but sadly, through the mismanagement of recent years, we are hard-pressed to maintain these improvements. Key drivers of the growth in teacher numbers over recent years include, first and foremost, an overall increase of over 40,000 pupils in our primary schools. Secondly, the provision of dedicated supports for pupils with special needs. The number of teachers for pupils with special needs has increased from a very low base to a current level close to 10,000 teachers between both primary and post-primary levels. Improvements in the staffing schedule for allocating teachers to schools. There is now an average of one mainstream classroom teacher for every 28 pupils. The provision of dedicated supports for pupils with English language needs. 10 years ago, we had about 260 of these language teachers in our schools, while today we have over 1,400 such teachers. However, as I begin the annual round of conferences in the primary and post-primary school sectors, I need to make clear that we no longer have the capacity, given the current economic and fiscal situation, to continually increase teacher numbers. We have to operate on the basis that we must do more with less. The Government has decided to adopt the specific budgetary targets under the EU IMF programme that must be met in 2011. There are specific EU IMF commitments and targets for 2012 in relation to a reduction in the overall number of public servants on the payroll, including teachers. The importance of meeting the targets cannot be overstated. It is only by meeting those targets that the EU IMF funding will continue to arrive in this country to enable us to continue to fund services while we make difficult and painful fiscal adjustments. In education, the task of managing our budget is complicated by the fact that enrolments will continue to increase over the next few years. Between now and 2016, we are expecting that there will be close to an extra 70,000 pupils in our primary and post-primary schools. While the Government is committed to protecting frontline education services to the greatest extent possible, we must not underestimate the challenge in doing so against a background of this level of rising enrolments, with its implications for teacher numbers and increased expenditure on capitation payments and on school building. For example, the expected increase of 57,000 pupils at primary level by 2018 would necessitate the provision of up to 2,050 extra classrooms. Notwithstanding provision for additional posts to meet demographics, the National Recovery Plan provided for a net reduction in teacher numbers in 2011. The detail on these measures was outlined in the 2011 budget. Given the previous legacy of economic mismanagement and the financial constraints in which this country now finds itself, it is not possible to reverse these changes. My department also has to exercise additional control and reporting measures this year to ensure that the numbers of teachers employed in schools is consistent with the EU IMF programme for support for Ireland. Flexible redeployment arrangements are required in order to ensure all surplus permanent teachers are redeployed into vacancies. Given our budgetary situation, we need to have sufficient flexibility in the redeployment arrangements to ensure that surplus teachers in all our schools, regardless of patronage type, can be readily redeployed to vacancies wherever they exist. In a public sector context generally, where there is job security, we must be able to maximise effectiveness by redeploying staff. In particular, given the exceptional arrangements applying whereby teacher vacancies are being filled, unlike other areas of the public service, we have a responsibility in this matter. The country simply cannot afford to have surplus teachers in a school while permitting recruitment to take place in another school. My department will be seeking in the coming period to recommence discussions with the relevant education partners at primary level on further changes that will be necessary if we are to achieve our objective of absorbing all surplus teachers into the vacancies that exist in other primary schools. We also have a new cross-sectoral redeployment scheme at post-primary level. The added complexity at post-primary level is the requirement to match surplus teachers with specific qualifications into vacancies in those subject areas. However, we don't have a choice, and it is essential that the new redeployment arrangements work well. During my visit to the school managers' conferences recently, I was interested to hear how modern technology is helping to enhance the range of subjects being taught in two separate schools in Ballybunion and Listowel in County Kerry. I want to encourage a greater take-up of this type of cooperation as a practical example of how the resources we provide can be used to maximum effect. The preparatory work will be commencing shortly for the budget for 2012. The EU-IMF agreement and the planning underpinning it recognise the need to make further payroll savings in 2012. There is provision for consultation with the education partners in relation to how best to achieve a further reduction in teacher payroll costs from 2012. Should the consultation process not produce alternative feasible measures to deliver the required savings, the introduction of appropriate increases in classroom teacher allocation schedules is envisaged. My department will be inviting the relevant partners to work on identifying measures that can deliver further savings. We need to ensure that any inefficiencies in our systems are eliminated so that we minimise the impact on frontline services. System. The programme for government makes clear our commitment to radically improving the literacy and numeracy standards achieved by our young people. No child should leave an Irish school unable to read and write. This will be one of the major goals of the government, and one where I am determined that we will address the serious weaknesses in our young people's learning that national assessments, inspection reports and international surveys have sadly identified. What we do in relation to early childhood and primary education can have a significant bearing on how successful we will be. This is an issue for second-level schools as well. I believe a cultural shift is needed so that all teachers in second-level schools, not just those teaching languages or resource teachers, but that all teachers recognise that they can play a constructive role in fostering improvement in literacy levels. This is especially true for geography teachers and history teachers in particular. The programme for government commits us to developing and implementing a national literacy and numeracy strategy which will provide a comprehensive set of measures to improve learning outcomes for children and young people. As you know, my department is engaged in a public consultation process on the contents of that strategy. And we have already received a very large number of written submissions, over 460, and my officials are meeting education partners and interest groups as part of the process. The strategy must provide a comprehensive approach to improvement. And I can say in particular, because it has been perhaps misheard or not fully understood, that literacy begins in the home. And, it's not the responsibility just of teachers. It is the responsibility of homes and families and teachers and schools working together. And I want that to be understood as part and parcel of our approach to this issue.
It's just 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Just a matter of courtesy.
Thank you very much. I have some more comments there, and I'll give them. They can go into the record of the House, sir. Thank you. In conclusion, our last Count Corla, I support this private member's motion. I think that it reflects the will of all of us as legislators, as citizens and as parents to ensure that the significant investment made in our education and training system is protected so that it will continue to play a key part in the personal and professional development of our young people and in contributing to economic recovery and job creation in the months and years ahead. We must, however, recognise the economic reality arising from the decisions of the past and acknowledge the competing demands for limited resources and the requirement to reduce public sector numbers further. While acknowledging this reality, this government will seek as far as possible to protect funding for education and training as a priority. I also commend this motion to the House.